friends, we're back today to continue with a read aloud, read along of Maya Angelou's memoir, Gathered Together in My Name. We are now up to chapter 29, which in this edition of the book begins on page 191. If you have a copy of the book, read along with me. Otherwise, you can just listen to me read chapter 29. Big Mary's house was near the corner of a typical small town block, and in the late afternoon sun, the clapboard cottages seemed to be dreaming. I concluded that I must have passed the house when I reached the farthest intersection. My mind was busy with other things, so when I turned and didn't see the house, I decided I was on the wrong street. Another glance at the street names on a signpost assured me that this was the street. Then where was the house? I started back. Here was the little white railroad house. Here was the house with a fenced yard. But it couldn't be Mary's house. The windows were boarded up and large planks had been nailed in an X across the door. The two houses flanking Big Mary's were empty. I might have stopped breathing as I walked up and down the creaking steps and tried to peer into windows. The world had suddenly spun off its familiar axis, and the rhythm of life slowed to quarter time. The streets and houses, broken toys that lay in overgrown weeds, were monotone in color like objects in an old sepia photograph. Who are you looking for? I turned to face a woman on a porch across the street. Time was in such a strange process that I had the opportunity to examine her in minute point. She was fat and white and wore a flowery, loose housecoat. From a distance, I made out her friendly countenance and the sweat that already dampened semicircles under her arms. My baby? But the words wouldn't come. I tried again and the words refused again. I had become paralyzed, literally struck dumb. I stared at the woman in horror. "Come over here, lady," she ordered, and I had no resistance. "I know you're looking for Big Mary, aren't you?" I nodded. "She moved 3 days ago. A big truck pulled up and took everything away." She must have waited for me to question her. After seconds, she continued, "You're the mother, aren't you?" I nodded. "There was a big coming and going of the other parents, but I noticed you didn't come for your little boy. Mary and I haven't spoken since she called me a meddling bee 3 years ago." She used foul language. But I broke the silence and asked where she was taking the boy. "She said you had given him to her. Said you were too busy." I asked where she was going and she told me none of my business. But I know she's got a brother in Bakersfield. It was a rattling tale told on the radio, and I couldn't make it have to do with my life. "If you want to call the police, come in. I'll give you some lemonade while you're waiting for them." The word police shook me awake. My brain moved sluggishly. Big Mary had left with my baby, and lied as well. Then she kidnapped him. If the police came, they'd question me about my job. A whore, well, I had to admit it. Wasn't a fit mother, and they'd take him from me and put me in jail. "I'll call them for you." The woman turned and an oblong of perspiration was dripping down the back of her dress. Before she reached the door, I forced my voice out. "No, thank you. I know where he is. Everything's all right." "Where is he?" The woman's suspicion was nasty. "I'm going there now. It's over on the south side, by the Slows." I waved at her. "Thanks anyway," I said, and marched down the street. LD's car was parked in front of his house. My scheme was to ring his bell and, if his wife answered, tell her I was an old friend and had a message for him from a friend. I'd quickly tell him about Big Mary and the baby, and he'd decide what to do. I was proud that I hadn't cried and that I wasn't afraid of his naggish wife. A pretty, 30-ish, light brown-skinned woman opened the door. Her long black hair curled around her shoulders, reminding me of a beige Hedy Lamarr. "You want to see LD? What's your name?" She had the same soft slur that made me love to hear LD talk. "My name is Rita." "Oh." Her lips firmed on the edges. "So you're Rita. Well, just wait a minute. I'll get Lou." She closed the door and I waited on the landing, wondering how we'd find my baby. "Rita." LD had opened the door and held it just wide enough for me to see half of his body. "What put it in your head to come to my house?" I whispered. "I told her I was a friend, LD. My baby's—" "Don't you have better sense than to come to my house?" I need some help, LD. I have to talk to you. He stepped out on the porch and pulled the door closed behind him. His face was inches from me and he spoke through uneven teeth. Let me pull your coat, you silly little bee. This is my house. No hoe goes to a man's house. You talk to my wife? No hoe opens her mouth to speak to a man's wife. He curled his mouth and snarled. Clara's never even met my wife, and Clara's been my woman 3 years. You've been gone a week and you got the nerve. Go to your place. I'll be there when I get time. He walked back in the house and slammed the door. I wanted desperately to cry. I had been stupid again, and stupidity had led me into a trap where I had lost my baby. I tried to erase L.D. Tollbrook from my mind. Obviously, he wasn't very bright. He had had a good woman who would have done anything to help him, and he was too dumb to even have the courtesy to listen to my troubles. And he had lied to me by not telling me that Clara was his woman. Pity. That he thought outsmarting a young girl, living off the wages of women, was honorable. He obviously had been doing it for years. He probably started in the South with white women, thinking that by taking their bodies and their money, he was getting revenge on the white men, who were free to insult him, ignore him, and keep him at the bottom of the heap. Clara must have wriggled her nose off in laughing at my stupidity with her daddy. And L.D.'s wife probably bought the white picky dress she wore with money I had made. I detested him for being a liar and a pimp, but more, I hated him for being such an idiot that he couldn't value my sterling attributes enough to keep me for himself alone. There was no thought of the greed which coerced me to agree with L.D.'s plans and the hope that I'd win, in the end, a life of ease and romance. Like most young women, I wanted a man, any man, to give me a June Allison screen role life with sunken living room and cashmere sweater sets, and I, for one, obviously would have done anything to get that life. I couldn't telephone Bailey or Mother. Even if they had been in the best of shape, I couldn't admit to them that out of ignorance, I'd lost the baby. As I walked, my rage at LD diminished, and I regained some steadying peripheral vision. Had I melted down on the pavement in tears of frustration, the action would not have changed the fact that my baby was still missing, or the fact that with this latest loss, I was shatteringly lonely for my baby and his arms hugging my neck. The weight was on me. I decided to sleep the night in my old room and leave the next morning for Bakersfield. The idea that Big Mary might have taken him on to Oklahoma was squashed over and over in my mind, like a buzzing fly. The small Southern California town on those midnight rides with LD had seemed fanciful and unreal. Now from the bus windows it was drab and seemed overpopulated with mean-faced whites straight out of my Arkansas past. A black man gave me a ride to Cottonwood Road. If her brother is farming, he got to be living around here somewhere, and you say you don't know his name? No, but I'll find him. He stopped his old car in front of a cafe that claimed home cooking. Well, I wish you Godspeed. Try in here, but be careful. These are some rough folks. I thanked him, and he drove away. The young waitress shouted over the noisy jukebox and talk. Anybody here know Mary Dawson? Conversation dimmed, but no one answered. She went on. This woman's looking for her baby. The faces became friendlier, but still there were no answers. Nobody knows her, honey. Try donut buckets. She directed me to a dirt floor joint a couple of blocks away. Old-timey blues whined in the artificial darkness, and one stout bartender walked up and down behind the bar, setting up and taking away beer bottles. Every stool was taken by men and women who laughed and talked with the easy familiarity of regulars. Mary Dawson? Mary Dawson. The bartender digested the name as he filed my face in his memory bank. Nah, baby, I don't know no Mary Dawson. They call her Big Mary. Big Mary? Nah, I don't know no Big Mary. She's got my baby. Took him away from Stockton. I felt as if I were blowing my breath against a tornado. His face softened as suspicion left it. What'd she look like? She's as tall as I sounded too dicty, but bigger. And she has a brother who farms around here. They're from Oklahoma. A little light winked in his eyes. Does she drink? Not often, but they say she drinks a lot when she does. In a coffee cup? The smile was abundant. Yes, I wanted to hug him. That's old John Peterson's sister. Yeah, baby, he lives about 3 miles from here. In the past, whenever I had slipped free of fate's pressing heel, I gave thanks. This time, I promised God a regular church attendance. Can you direct me? You can't walk it. Wait a minute. He called to a man over at the jukebox. Buddy! The man turned and came over to the bar. Little lady, Buddy runs a cab service. Buddy, you know where John Peterson's place is. Buddy nodded. Take her out there, will you? Buddy nodded again. He'll treat you right, little lady. Good luck. I thanked the bartender and followed Buddy to a dilapidated car. He said nothing on the ride, but my heart beat so that I wouldn't have been able to answer in any case. He stopped the car on a lonely road surrounded by overturned farmland. A graying clapboard house set deep in a plot of muddy ground. Buddy nodded toward the house. That's it. You want me to come back to get you? I looked at the house, which seemed left alone, and thought that maybe its occupants had gone to Oklahoma. Then I noticed some movement a few hundred yards from the house. I focused on the movement, trying to determine if the action was caused by a pet or a farm animal rooting in the mud. In a second, my heart squeezed and I screamed, "My baby! That's my baby!" One thought shot my legs out of the car, and in 2 steps I was ankle deep in muck, and new thoughts loosing in my mind. Where does he think his mother is? I picked him up and pressed him close. I felt his body throb and pound with excitement. He stiffened his arms and pushed himself away to see my face. He kissed me and then started crying. The restraint which had held through the long night on the bus trip began to disintegrate. He took a fistful of my hair and twisted and pulled, crying all the time. I couldn't untangle the hair or pull my head away. I stood holding him while he raged at being abandoned. My sobs broke free on the waves of my first guilt. I had loved him and never considered that he was an entire person. Separate from my boundaries, I had not known before that he had and would have a life beyond being my son, my pretty baby, my cute doll, my charge. In the plowed farmyard near Bakersfield, I began to understand that uniqueness of the person. He was 3 and I was 19, and never again would I think of him as a beautiful appendage of myself. Big Mary leaned against the rickety kitchen table. I didn't mean no harm, I just love him. I take good care of him, you know that. Her big face crumbled like pastry dough and she trembled. Why don't you let him stay with me a while? She looked at Guy in my arms and her voice pinched into baby talk. Pretty, don't you want to stay with Big Mary? Tell your mama you want to stay. His arms scissored around my neck. I'm taking him, Mary. She couldn't control the tears. Can't you all stay one night, just one? I have a taxi waiting. I started to the door. Well, wait and I'll get his things together. No, that's all right. We have to leave. She made a lunge, but stopped before she reached me. You don't hate me, do you, Rita? I pray God you don't hate me. I don't hate you, Mary. He was the prettiest of them all, and you was always going somewhere. I understand, Mary. Goodbye. Say goodbye, Guy. Goodbye. Buddy took us to the bus station, and my muddy baby and I headed for San Francisco again. And that's chapter 29. We'll be back next time to pick up on chapter 30. We have 2 more chapters to read, and then we'll be finished with this memoir. I hope you've enjoyed reading it along with me. And of course, if you want to read or listen to me read earlier chapters of this book, as well as chapters from her first memoir, go ahead, look in the description box down below. You'll find links to the playlist down there where you can search around and listen to any of the chapters that you like. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for reading this book along with me. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more. Let's chat in the comments. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.